What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today it's another edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast. And longtime viewers of the show might be looking at my face if you're watching on YouTube and be wondering, what is all that crap on his face? And the truth of the matter is, it's been about a week since I've shaved, just because every so often, about once a year or so, I go about a week, sometimes even two if I'm really dedicated to the idea, and I try to grow out a beard until I realize that looks terrible on me and it just makes my face look dirty. But for those of you, out there enjoying the video feed, you get to watch this glorious attempt that results in my face looking dirty. Anyway, so thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. Today we are going to be looking at a random Magic card and talking about it for about 10 minutes, as we usually do in an unscripted, unedited style. So let's go ahead and hit that random card button and jump right on into it. All right, today we are looking at Lava Coil. Now, Lava Coil is a wonderful piece of removal. It is a sorcery for 1 and a red that deals 4 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. And this is from Guilds of Ravnica, which, if you were around when Arena first launched, you were probably around when Guilds of Ravnica came out, which was about the time that I was actually getting back into the game, which was a lovely time, actually, to be getting back into Magic. It was at a time when we could still shake hands without that being potentially lethal, which was pretty great. And Arena was actually just coming out. It was really coming into its own and becoming a viable platform. So as someone who was just figuring out what the heck a commander was, and even what the heck a modern was, if I'm honest, it was pretty fantastic to see that we were returning to Ravnica, which incidentally was the guild that was actually coming out when I fell off the first time. Nothing against the original Ravnica set, just life got in the way. And so here I am jumping back into the game, and we're back on a really cool plane that I got to explore originally when it had first come out. Now, I'm not talking Return to Ravnica, I'm talking OG Ravnica that came out in, like, what is that, 2005, 2004? One of those. And that was, that was my first foray with the game. So Lava Coil specifically is an interesting piece of removal because it actually is very similar to another card that I can't help but think about called Carbonize, which is basically the exact same thing, except it costs, I think, 4 because it overvalues, or no, I think it costs 3, but it does 3 damage or something like that. It's similar, but if the creature would die, it exiles instead. It kind of overvalues that a little bit, but Lava Coil is very, very good. And one of the reasons that I personally really disliked Lava Coil when it was standard legal is because I ran reanimation strategies. And what is the one thing that no reanimation player ever wants? They don't want their creatures going into exile because it is almost, if not completely impossible, and in standard, generally it's completely impossible to get them out of exile. I know that's not always the case. We have other cards that interact with the exile zone, but for the most part, once something's in exile, it is removed from the game, which is ultimately what exile was originally intended to be. So with Lava Coil, if I had a small creature down, if I had a Doomed Dissenter, for example, somebody could hit it with a Lava Coil and it would be just gone forever. And on top of that, if it would die this turn, you exile it. So that's actually a replacement effect. So it doesn't technically die. So in the case of a creature like Doomed Dissenter that has a death trigger, that you actually want it to die, because once it dies, it brings a zombie into play. So you get something for it dying. With Lava Coil, you don't get that. There's no benefit to this creature dying. It's just gone. It's the red equivalent to something like a Path of Exile or Swords to Plowshares that just straight exiles the creature. It's kind of the red equivalent of that. So it's basically, this card ultimately reads, exile target creature with power 4 or less. That's basically what it does, except for one key detail. If I'm not mistaken, now, one of the things I'm not exactly sure about is how this interacts with Indestructible. Because it reads, if that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. My read on that is it would not kill indestructible creatures, because indestructible creatures will not die to damage. And because it wouldn't die, that replacement clause never comes into play. That's my read on it. I believe that that's how it works. If you're a judge, please let me know in the comments below how I got that wrong, if I did, in fact, get that wrong. Or if you're a judge and I got that right, please let me know. I appreciate that. Yeah, I know enough with the rules to be dangerous, but that's one of those where, yeah, I might be wrong on that. Anyway, so The other thing is it can only target creatures. That's the other limitation of Lava Coil. You'll notice a lot of removal nowadays, like Royal Eruption, for example, or good old-fashioned Shock, which is just floating around in Standard right now, too. You can hit a creature as well as a player or even a Planeswalker. Lava Coil is limited to only creatures. You can't touch Planeswalkers with it. You cannot touch your opponent's face with it. So it is strictly creature removal, which in some decks means that it actually fits better coming out of the sideboard than in the main deck itself, which makes sense. There are certain situations. If you're going up against a control deck that has very few creatures, Lava Coil is a dead card in most situations, much like any other 2-drop removal. If anything, actually, Lava Coil, it fits a similar role as something like Heartless Act, or what we now have in Bloodchief's Thirst, which is, although Heartless Act is instant speed, so that's a little bit different, but it's sorcery speed removal that's fairly powerful. It is somewhat limited because it can't kill really big creatures, but I do want to point out, this can eliminate a Questing Beast or a Terror of the Peaks. You'll notice actually that a lot of really powerful creatures, Terror of the Peak specifically I find interesting because it's a 5/4. Like, they worked really hard to make sure that its toughness was 4. That way, burn spells like this that hit for 4, or board wipes that hit for 4 like Storm's Wrath, can still hit it. Those effects, being able to target and remove big threatening creatures, is incredibly important if you are in red. It's incredibly important. I cannot stress this enough. So I really appreciate, so big hats off to the Wizards the Wizards playtesting team for identifying that certain creatures that were large threats needed to have toughness 4 or less. I think that's something that was very, very important. Now, that said, because actually, if you notice, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of Questing Beast. You've got Questing Beast, you've got Terror of the Peaks, are the two that come to mind right off the bat. You even have the Omnath, who is, of course, now banned, but 4-color Omnath is a 4/4. You know, even he is susceptible to 4 damage removal spells. Now, Lava Coil rotated out of Standard alongside the most recent rotation, so it's not it's not relevant right now as far as Standard is concerned, but you can still tell, and I think it's related to Storm's Wrath specifically. That's the one that's the red board wipe where it's for 2 red, and it deals 4 damage to every creature and every planeswalker. That spell is incredibly useful, and I run it in a lot of my decks because it's a great way to eliminate a lot of key threats that are out there in the meta right now. Now that I'm thinking about it, if a creature in the current meta can drop onto the board and have an immediate impact and is very influential on the game, a lot of those in the current meta have toughness 4 or less. That I find really interesting, and also not terribly surprising, given that seems to be a threshold for red removal spells. So I think that makes good sense. Now, there are plenty also that hit for 3 specifically, like the aforementioned Royal Eruption. That's basically Lightning Bolt, kind of, except with Kicker, and it costs 2 instead of 1. But, but there does seem to be that Storm's Wrath, Lava Coil range is relevant for these creatures, and I find that interesting. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that I'm kind of running out of gas and not really without much less to say, because Lava Coil is a card that I ran into a lot back in the day, and as somebody who was trying to make Reanimator work in a meta where Reanimator had no business working, it was frustrating to have all my creatures exiled. But at the end of the day, it's a very powerful, very solid removal spell. This is just, if you see it in a draft, you're going to want to grab it, because it's really solid premium removal, which when you see that at Uncommon, you just got to grab it. And then if you're in Constructed, it's great sideboard material. It's really excellent sideboard material in formats where it's acceptable. Now, that said, in a format where Lava Coil is legal, you probably have better options, because right now it's looking like it's historic, it's pioneer, it's modern. I don't know that Lava Coil is good enough to see play in any of those formats, given how large the card pool is. I don't know them well enough, so I could be wrong. There could be a fringe situation where a Lava Coil in a historic sideboard makes a lot of sense. I don't know. I think if creatures that are in play going to the graveyard becomes overpowered and beneficial to players in historic, you will see Lava Coil making a resurgence as a way to hose those types of strategies. If that is not a major strategy in historic, which at this point it's not, to my knowledge, then Lava Coil is going to remain as kind of this obscure piece of removal that was really solid once, but just doesn't really cut it anymore. So this has been a fun little trip down memory lane, guys. I appreciate, well, it's memory lane that isn't like a year ago when this card was all over. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you guys. I hope you're having a fantastic day. You can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhocks42. And yeah, and I will catch you next time. And don't forget, you are a good person, and you deserve to be happy.